Joel Crane was not supposed to be on Route 9 that night. He had taken the long way home because his daughter asked him to stop at the gas station for a specific flavor of sparkling water. Grapefruit, not the lime. Because the lime was wrong in a way she could not explain but felt strongly about. And Route 9 was the only road, with the station still open at 9:45 on a Tuesday. He was dreading the phone call he had to make when he got back. He had no idea the woman folded against the deployed airbag of the silver sedan that had just rolled into the drainage ditch off the shoulder was the same woman Harrow National Bank had assigned 3 days ago to oversee his foreclosure. The ditch water was already up to her window. He could see, from 30 feet away in the beam of his headlights, that her door was jammed. He could see the water climbing the glass. He was running before he finished the thought. Joel Crane was a structural welder. He had been doing it for 17 years, the last 4 out of a small shop he rented on the south edge of Millhaven, a converted auto bay that smelled like flux and cold metal, and the coffee he made at 5:30 every morning before his daughter woke up. His clients were contractors, mostly, but on the left wall above his workbench there were 3 photographs he kept, not for decoration, but as reminders of what the work could be. A close-up of the custom load-bearing joint he had fabricated for the Garfield Bridge restoration. A finished weld seam on the Carver County Courthouse renovation, and a single shot of a spiral staircase he had built for a house in the hills east of town. A client whose architect had told her it couldn't be done in steel, and who had sent the photograph with a handwritten note that said simply, "Now, you tell him." He was 39 years old and had the hands for it. Burns scarred across the knuckles, the right index finger crooked from a break that set slightly wrong, calluses on the heel of each palm in the exact pattern of a man who had been gripping electrode holders since he was 22. He wore his work clothes most places because it had stopped occurring to him not to. He drove a truck that was 12 years old and did not apologize for it. His daughter's name was Nora. She was 8 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and her mother's habit of going completely still when she was thinking through something that mattered. She carried a small red notebook everywhere, a composition notebook with a water-damaged cover that she had repaired with electrical tape the color of her rain boots. The notebook was full, front to back, with drawings and observations and occasional lists of things she believed to be facts, organized under headings she made up herself. She had been filling notebooks like it since she was 5. She was on her 3rd. The first 2 lived in a specific drawer in Joel's workbench, the second from the left, because she said the shop was where things got built, and she liked the idea of her thoughts being near that. Tonight Nora was at home with the neighbor's teenager, and Joel was en Route 9 with a specific deadline that he had not told her about, because she was 8, and the weight of it was not hers to carry. Harrow National Bank had issued a notice of default on the home equity loan Joel had taken to replace the shop equipment after a fire 2 years ago. The loan was $61,000 at origination. He had paid it down to $38,400. He had not missed a payment in 14 months. 3 weeks ago, the bank had sent a letter informing him they were calling the loan early under an acceleration clause in the fine print, citing a provision they had not enforced for the first 15 months, triggered by a technicality in his business registration that had since been corrected. He had 22 days to produce $38,400 or the lien would execute, and the house would proceed to auction. He had $19,000 and a lawyer who charged $200 an hour to confirm what Joel had already read in the contract himself. He did not think about the bank while he drove. He thought about the weld on the Thompson job that had to be finished by Thursday, and the propane regulator on the 3rd tank that needed replacing, and the grapefruit sparkling water in the bag on the passenger seat. He turned onto Route 9 at 9:38. He was home in his mind already, in the kitchen, listening to Nora tell him about whatever she had decided was a fact today. He never got there. Not yet. Across town, in the 27th floor office of Harrow National Bank's regional headquarters, Sylvia Marsh was putting on her coat. She was the bank's head of distressed asset resolution, a title that meant she was the person who received files when borrowers ran out of options and the bank ran out of patience. She had held the position for 6 years. She was 41, and precise in the way that people who have spent years reading fine print become precise. She noticed the thing that was slightly wrong before she noticed the thing that was right. She had a talent for seeing structures clearly, contracts, relationships, organizations, and for identifying the exact point at which something that looked solid was, in fact, not. She had inherited the Crane file 3 days ago from a colleague who had taken leave. She had read it once on a Thursday afternoon and had set it in the stack with 7 others and had not thought about it again until today when her paralegal had flagged the acceleration timeline. She had not yet called Joel Crane. She planned to review the file in the morning. The thing that her salary and her title could not fix. Her brother, not what had happened to him. She had made peace with that. Mostly, the way you make peace with something that is not actually at rest. What she had not made peace with was what she had done the year before it happened. He had called her 7 times in 4 months, asking her to look at the loan documents on his landscaping business, a loan she had not originated but that had come through a predecessor at this same bank. And she had been busy. And she had said so, and she had meant to get back to him. And then she had not needed to because he had found out for himself what was wrong. By losing the business, and then the house. And then most of a year to something that did not have a clean name, but that she recognized now. Looking back, as a man going under in slow motion while the people around him looked at their phones. He was okay now. He lived in a different city. They talked every few weeks. It was fine. It was not fine. She did not know how to make it more than fine, and she did not let herself think about this for longer than a few minutes at a time, because she had learned that the minutes could extend. She left the office at 9:41. She was on Route 9 by 9:47. She was not paying attention to the curve at mile marker 6 the way she would have been if she had not been thinking about her brother. The road was dry. The night was clear. The steering pulled left without warning, and then she was sideways. And then there was the noise of it. And then there was the airbag. And then there was the cold of the water at the window. And then there was stillness. He got the door open on the 3rd pull. It required bracing his right foot against the body of the car and using his whole back, and the sound it made was the sound of metal giving up something it had been holding. The water was at the seat when he got her arm over his shoulder. She was conscious, and she was holding his jacket with both hands, and she said something he couldn't hear clearly over the sound of the water and his own breathing. And he said, "I have you." And he meant it the way you mean things when there is no room for anything less. And he got her to the shoulder of the road and set her down on the gravel and checked her breathing and her eyes and her hands for the glass she might have caught from the window. "Don't move," he said. "I'm fine," she said, which was not yet true, but would be. He called 911. He got a blanket from the truck. She was shaking with the cold and the shock of it, and he put the blanket around her shoulders and crouched next to her on the gravel and held the corner of it closed because her hands weren't steady enough yet to hold anything. She looked at his hands, the burn-scarred knuckles, the crooked finger, the calluses. She was still in the part of shock where you see things very precisely because the brain has not yet started organizing them. "You're a welder," she said. He looked at her. "Yeah, the knuckle scars, the grip calluses." She stopped. She was cataloging, still, without deciding to. I process a lot of loan files. You start to recognize the hand profiles. He did not respond to being categorized. He watched the road for the ambulance lights. After a moment, he said, "Can you feel your feet?" Yes, she pressed them into the gravel, proving it to herself. "What's your name?" "Joel." She looked at him for a moment with the specific attention of a person who is storing something. Then she looked at the car in the ditch. The water was at the window now. She looked at the black surface of it for a long time. "You didn't have to stop," she said. "Not gratitude, something past gratitude, something quieter." "Someone was in the water," he said. "That's not a choice." The ambulance came at 9:58. He gave a statement to the responding officer. He watched the paramedics clear her and listened to her give her name, Sylvia Marsh. And then he stood at his truck with the wet sleeves of his jacket stiffening in the night air, and understood, in the wordless way that the body understands things the mind hasn't caught up to yet, that he was not going to make the drive home feel like nothing. He was going to have to sit with what the ditch looked like before he got the door open. He drove home. He went straight to Nora's room. She was asleep. He stood in the doorway for a while. She came back the next morning. He was in the shop at 7:15 when the truck pulled into the lot. Not a truck, a sedan, a rental. One arm in a sling that was more precautionary than structural. She walked in with her left hand holding a paper cup of coffee and set it on his workbench with the deliberate care of someone whose dominant arm was out of commission. "I didn't get a chance to," she started. "You don't need to," he said. "I know I don't need to." She looked at the photographs on the left wall. She looked at the Garfield Bridge joint, then the courthouse seam, then the spiral staircase. She looked at the staircase for a moment that was slightly longer than the others. "You built this?" Client was told it couldn't be done in steel. She looked at him. Then she looked at the wall of the shop, the equipment, the racks, the welding table, the fire-damaged corner near the back that he had repaired but not repainted, which still showed the clean geometry of the work under the new drywall. Her eyes went to the corner and stayed there half a second too long. "Is that from the fire?" she said. 2 years ago. She did not say she was sorry. She looked at it the way engineers look at repairs, reading the structure, not the event. Then she said, "Not because she decided to. Did the loan come through Harrow?" He looked at her steadily. Yes, the silence that came after that was not comfortable. It was the silence of two people who have recognized that they are standing on opposite sides of something that neither of them put there. "I need to tell you something," she said. The door opened before she could. Not the front, the side door, the one he kept unlocked during shop hours, which opened directly into the workspace. A small figure in a red coat, carrying a composition notebook with an electrical tape spine appeared in the doorway, looked at the two adults with perfect 8-year-old directness, and said, "Dad, Mrs. Kowalski says you forgot to sign the field trip form. She needs it by 9. She held up the notebook. "I brought it because I was coming anyway." Joel said, "I forgot it. I know you forgot it. That's why I brought it." Nora looked at Sylvia with the frank appraisal of a child who has not been taught to pretend she's not looking. "Are you okay? Your arm's in a thing." "I'm fine," Sylvia said. "Thank you for asking. My dad says most people forget to ask that when someone has an obvious injury. They just sort of look at it." Nora came further into the shop, notebook clutched to her chest. "He says it's because they're embarrassed for themselves, not because they don't care. I think that's probably true." She looked at the photographs on the left wall. She looked at the spiral staircase. He built that for a lady who everyone said couldn't have it. She sent us a picture. She said it with the casual ownership of a child who has long since decided that her father's work is hers too. Sylvia looked at the photograph and then at Nora. "Is that your favorite one?" Nora considered this with appropriate seriousness. "It's the one where someone said no first," she said. "Those are always the most interesting." Sylvia was quiet for a moment. She looked at Joel. What was on her face in that moment was something she could not have named, because it required acknowledging something she had spent several years not acknowledging. That she had, in fact, said no first to her brother, and that the thing she was looking at now was a different version of what could have happened if one person had looked harder. Joel signed the form. Nora said goodbye with the efficiency of someone who has already moved on to the next thing and went back through the side door. The shop was quiet. "What did you need to tell me?" Joel said. The man who arrived at 11:15 did not knock. He walked through the front of the shop the way people walk into spaces they have already decided belong to them. His name was Craig Vossel. He was Harrow National's regional vice president for lending and had been for 11 years. He had a habit, every time he entered a room, of sliding his wedding ring off his right finger, where he wore it when he drove, and onto his left, where he wore it for meetings. He did this without looking. He had done it so many times it was entirely unconscious. He did it now, in the doorway of Joel Crane's shop, transferring the ring from right to left with the smooth, automatic gesture of a man arriving for business. He looked at Joel. He looked at Sylvia. He smiled at Sylvia in the way of someone who has rehearsed the smile. "Marsh, I heard about last night. Glad you're upright." He did not ask if she was okay. He looked back at Joel. "Mr. Crane, you've had some correspondence from the bank." "I have," Joel said. "Then you know where things stand." He said this pleasantly, the way people are pleasant when they believe the outcome is already decided. 22 days was generous. Given the covenant breach, the registration issue was corrected in October, Joel said. 3 months before the letter. The covenant existed at the time of the review period. Vossel slid the ring to the left finger again. It was already there, and the gesture came out wrong. A double slide. A tell. He didn't notice. The acceleration is within the bank's rights. "You have," he checked his watch, "now 20 days. "The Gray Line account," Joel said. His voice did not rise. It dropped slightly to the register he used when a weld was going to require precision. Sub-account GL 4492. The 6 transfers between August and November, each structured at $9,800. He paused. Harrow's own compliance manual, section 14.3, defines structured deposits under $10,000 as a reportable pattern requiring internal review. The account is registered to an LLC incorporated in Wyoming with no operating history. FinCEN structuring guidelines, which Harrow is required to follow as an FDIC member bank, classify that pattern as a mandatory referral. He picked up a bolt from the workbench, not for any purpose, just to have something in his hand. The account opened in the same quarter the acceleration clause was added to the commercial loan template, which was also the quarter the compliance officer position was eliminated. He set the bolt down. That's a lot of paperwork to be in one place. Craig Vossel's hand went to his left finger. The ring was already there. His hand came down. He did not threaten. He did not compose a response. He looked at Joel Crane the way a man looks at a wall he did not realize was there. And then he looked at Sylvia Marsh, and what he saw in her face told him what he needed to know. He walked out of the shop. He did not take a parting shot. He simply stopped being in the doorway, and then he was gone, and the sound of his car on the gravel faded, and the shop was quiet again, and Joel put the bolt back exactly where he had found it. Sylvia stood still for a long time. She had known about GL 4492. She had found it 6 weeks ago during a routine audit and had filed the internal referral, and had been told by Vossel's office that the matter was under review and that no further action was required from her. She had accepted this. She had not known, until this moment, what else was in the same quarter's records as the account. She had not known about the acceleration clause template. She had not known about the compliance officer position. She had been processing files for 6 years, and she had not known the shape of what she was inside of. The shop was very quiet. Joel did not speak. He did not fill the space or give her a way out of sitting with it. He picked up the bolt again and rolled it once in his palm and put it down. She had a friend at the AUK. Not a contact, a friend from law school who had gone to the office of the comptroller of the currency when Sylvia had gone to banking. She called her from the rental car in the parking lot of the shop and gave her the account number, the date range, the structuring pattern, and the name of the LLC. She said she would send the internal referral she had filed and the response she had received. She said she was sorry it had taken this long. Her friend said, "Get it to me today." She sent the file that afternoon. She drove back to Millhaven the following morning because she had also done something she had not done in 6 weeks. She had read the Crane file all the way through. Not for the clock, but for the structure. The acceleration clause was in the 2022 commercial template. It had been inserted without a board notice, which was a procedural violation. The business registration issue had been corrected and documented in October. The loan had been performing without interruption for 14 months. The file, read whole, did not describe a risk. It described a man who had rebuilt something after a fire and was paying for it on time, and a bank that had found a clause and used it. She drove to Joel's shop at 8 in the morning and told him what she had found, and what she had done, and what she believed would happen next. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he said nothing for a moment. He was looking at the photographs on the left wall. Then he said, "Why?" She thought about her brother and the 7 phone calls and the months she had spent being busy. She did not say any of that. She said, "Because it's the right file." The AUK referral triggered a formal review within 72 hours. Sylvia had submitted the documentation herself, directly, to her contact, not through the bank's internal channel, which had already failed once. The review examiner called her on the 4th day. The call lasted 40 minutes. She answered every question clearly and on record. On the 7th day, the examiner called again. This time she put it on speaker in Joel's shop, at his workbench, because it was his loan and his house, and he had the right to hear it in real time. The examiner said, the acceleration notice on the Crane loan was being voided pending findings. The lien would not execute. The $38,400 balance would revert to its original payment schedule. The Grayline account and the GL 4492 sub-account had been referred to FinCEN, and Harrow National's lending practices for the 2022 commercial template were under examination. She would hear from the bank's new compliance counsel within the week. Joel listened to the examiner's voice come through the phone speaker. He heard the specific sentence, "The lien would not execute," and he put both hands flat on the workbench and stood still in the way he stood still when he needed a moment that did not have an audience. His knuckles were white on the steel. Then, they were not. He looked at the second drawer from the left, where Nora's first 2 notebooks lived. He did not say anything for a moment. Craig Vossel was placed on administrative leave the same afternoon. The AUK's formal findings, released 11 days later, cited the GL 4492 account. the non-compliant template revision, the eliminated compliance position, and 4 additional loans that had been accelerated under the same clause in the same fiscal year. 3 of them were being reviewed for reinstatement. Vassel's ring did not transfer from left to right at any of the subsequent hearings. There was no subsequent hearing that he walked out of. The OC examiner's office sent a 4-line letter. It said what the facts required it to say. 8 months later. Nora Crane was 9 now, and she had started a 4th notebook. The cover was blue. The first page was a list of things she had decided were definitely true, which included that the best welds were the ones you couldn't see from the outside, that asking if someone was okay was not embarrassing, it was just paying attention, and that the most interesting projects were the ones where someone said no first. She had written that last one in her 3rd notebook 2 months ago, and had transferred it to the 4th because she had decided it was a permanent truth, not a temporary one. The house was still the house. The shop was still the shop. The fire-damaged corner had a new coat of paint now, not because the structure had changed, but because Nora had asked if they could, and Joel had let her pick the color, and she had picked the same shade of red as her composition notebooks, which she said was the color of things that had been repaired and were now better than before. Sylvia Marsh had left Harrow National in February, not under pressure, on her own terms, on a Thursday, with a letter that said exactly what she meant and nothing more. She had taken 6 weeks and then gone to work for a nonprofit legal organization that reviewed bank lending practices in small market communities. The work paid 60% of what the bank had paid. She had not needed 60 seconds to decide. She had also driven to see her brother in March. She had not called ahead. He had opened the door and looked at her, and she had said, "I should have read the documents." He had not said it was fine, because they were both past saying things that weren't exactly true. He had said, "Come in." She had stayed for the weekend. She had called again in April. And May. On a Saturday in late September, Nora Crane was sitting at the workbench in the shop with her 4th notebook open, filling a page with what she had decided about arches. She had read something about how arches work, how the stones press against each other and that pressure is what holds them, and she was writing down why she thought that was interesting. When Sylvia Marsh came through the side door with 2 coffees and said, "I brought the grapefruit one," Nora looked up. "How did you know I liked grapefruit?" "Your dad mentioned it." Nora considered this with appropriate weight. "He remembers that kind of thing," she said. "He pays attention to the small stuff because he says the small stuff is usually the load-bearing part." She said it the way she said everything she had carried long enough to call her own, like a fact, like something that had been tested and held. She opened the notebook to the page about arches. She picked up her pen. "You can sit in his chair," she said. "He won't mind." Joel came in from the back lot 5 minutes later and found the 2 of them at the workbench and did not say anything. He looked at the photographs on the left wall. He looked at the corner that was red now instead of bare. He looked at his daughter explaining arches to a woman who was listening the way people listen when they are not waiting to respond. He set down what he was carrying. He did not pick it up again. There are things you cannot weld back together, and there are things that hold better for having been broken and reset correctly, and the difference between them is not the material. It is whether the person doing the work knew where to look. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needed to be reminded that showing up in the cold, for a stranger, without knowing what it would cost, is the kind of thing that changes the whole shape of what comes after. Subscribe for more every week. And tell us this: when you realized the system you were working inside was wrong, not the policy, not the paperwork, but the actual thing underneath it, Did you go through the channel that had already failed once? Or did you find a different door? Leave your answer in the comments. We read every one.